of hands, how many people in the audience write code? All right. So a lot, but not so much that we need to speak strictly in developer today. Got it. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce this panel. They've all been explaining their work expertly. So Will, I was wondering if you could start us off just by sharing what is the current state of usage of Joule, that tool you were explaining earlier.
Yeah, so Joule, which I got to show off a little bit before, is a browser extension that you hook your Lightning node into. Right now, I'm seeing maybe about 2,000 people using it, so it's getting some good usage amongst, if you consider that there are 8,000 nodes online. And a lot of those are, businesses. It's getting some pretty good usage, but definitely it is in the fun and games stage. Most of the applications, people, Elizabeth talked about like Poyo feed and all these things that are kind of mostly for fun. Not really. We're not quite at like a e-commerce level.
Gotcha. And that's for LND, right?
Yeah. So it currently works on LND. Though I'm sure Lisa will convince me to get a C Lightning setup going.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things about the Lightning Network is these different implementations. Lisa, do you want to catch us up on anything that your presentation wasn't able to touch on when it comes to C Lightning development right now?
Yeah, sure. So I think kind of if you look at like the ecosystem of stuff that's been built for Lightning right now, I think a lot more stuff has been built tool-wise for LND. Like there's definitely some C Lightning projects, but it's definitely something that we're trying to make it more accessible for people to build third-party tools for C Lightning.
Can everybody hear her okay?
Great.
Okay, good.
Yeah. And one of the ways that we've been doing that is in the 0.6 release that came out, I believe in April or March, added this new plugin system, which basically allows third-party developers to build kind of like in-process applications that get you more access to kind of customizing things that you want your nodes to do, for example. So.
Gotcha. And you had talked a little bit about dual channel funding, right?
Oh yeah. So that's spec work, which is like a little bit different than like third-party extension stuff. So the dual funding proposal is something that we back in November, there was a spec meeting in Australia where we went through kind of a list of things that we want to see added for 1.1 version of the spec. There's a bunch of stuff that kind of got like a rubber stamp approved that hey, we as the Lightning community would like to add these things to the implementations, and one of those things was dual funding. That basically, right now, when you open a channel, only one side has the opportunity to put funds into it. And so dual funding would be when you go to open a channel, both sides will have the opportunity to contribute funds if they'd like to, which hopefully will lead to a more balanced kind of network topology in terms of where funds are available to send from one side to the other.
Yeah, Alex, you're also working on fund flows within channels, right? Loops that you had mentioned earlier. Can you tell me a little bit about how that might add a dynamic of positional value to the network?
Yeah, I would definitely say that inbound liquidity is not all created equal. So some people think, oh, I have 1 Bitcoin worth of inbound liquidity, and that means I'm set. But if that liquidity itself is in a weird corner of the network, then maybe you can't receive. And if you're a routing node, if everybody else shares a similar common inbound liquidity, so everybody else has incoming connections maybe from LNBig, well, then you're not really bridging anybody together. And the way that you generate fees and the way that you add value to the network is by bridging people together as a router.
So I'd like to actually go down the line, if it's OK, and ask what kind of Lightning usage you guys expect will increase this year. Lisa, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, let's see, what kind of Lightning stuff. I think we're going to see more vendors coming online. Or at least I hope that we see more vendors coming online.
What kind of vendors?
I think the example that I found most interesting is there's a rapper called Little Pump who recently opened a node to sell T-shirts and basically swag online, and I believe he's accepting Lightning payments. So I think that is I think that's a good example of kind of where the first kind of iteration of new users on the network are going to be, or people existing vendors or maybe new vendors who are selling stuff that you can buy using Lightning.
Gotcha. Alex, what do you think?
One thing I'm excited about is the prospect of bringing exchange flows onto the Lightning Network. Right now, it's pretty, poorly capitalized for the billions of dollars that flow through exchanges. But I see us taking some first steps into moving market buys into the network.
Gotcha.
I'll give Alex some credit. I do think that exchanges are a good use case, but as much as I love working on the Lightning Network and building cool things, I think we're going to be strictly fun and games for a little while. I mean, like, none of you out here want to spend your Bitcoin, right? Like, the price is going up, you want to hold on to it. People
aren't. My Bitcoin. Some people do.
Thank you, and I will receive your Bitcoin. Yeah, I love the vendor use case, and I want to build towards it. And I think Lightning is in this interesting position where a lot of technology kind of gets interest before the tech is there. I think Lightning is going to be kind of the opposite. Since people don't really want to spend their Bitcoin right now, we're just going to work on building up the tech. And once we kind of get to a point where it's more stable and people think about it as this alternative currency, Lightning will be ready. But I think for the next year, probably going to be seeing a lot more games.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Lisa, I have a kind of difficult question for you. How do you think that the Lightning Network is going to impact the cypherpunk movement in the culture more broadly?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So like, I'm a little bit hesitant to like answer for like the cypherpunk community because like I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm like a direct member of it, but based on what I know kind of about their ethos in terms of kind of like a decentralization or at least my interpretation of their ethos, which is sort of like giving the power to people to be able to kind of transact without having to go through like certain like authorized vendors, if that makes sense. I think that Lightning kind of has this real potential to enable people to transact like locally, if that makes sense. So like it's super easy just to like send payment directly and you don't have to involve a middleman. One thing that I really like about Lightning and that I think that the spec developers are doing a really good job of like keeping in the forefront of their minds when they're adding new things to the system is the ability to preserve anonymity. And that's like, so like, there's definitely this like ability for you to like go out and buy something and like not have that show up like anywhere, if that makes sense. In terms of like I don't know if this is like totally true, but I've heard from some friends who work in like the payment systems, like more traditionally, that like hedge funds are working on buying credit card data so that they have an idea of where like trends are going before it hits like the stock market. So like anytime you use like a credit card is like attached to you, right? And you can like see really easily whether we want to or not, kind of where money flows are going, and people are using that information for different purposes. If you're a trader, I could see how you would want that information to like buy Macy's stock or whatever. But it's kind of cool that we are like developing like this like real alternative that allows people to kind of keep your business private, if that makes sense, in like a real way.
Yeah, gotcha. I think that raises an question about intentions, right? The user's intentions when they're using the network. Alex, do you think that the Lightning Network has an ethos, meaning that you could abuse it by using it in a way that it's not designed to be used, or is it open source software, so anything goes?
Well, I think there's definitely an ethos that drives development. So, like when we're making L&D, we're thinking about what we want to achieve, what change we want to see happen. But as far as like crypto anarchy goes, I think it's really very descriptive rather than prescriptive. So, like, we're not saying like you shouldn't censor. We're saying let's make it impossible for censorship to happen. So, or as difficult as we can make it. So. I think that's like the Lightning Network in some ways is like, that's how it is. We've set up this network of contracts. You have these kind of pseudo-anonymous identities described by pub keys, and then you make of it what you will.
And I mean, as my boy Marty Bent always says, Bitcoin and by extension Lightning is this alien technology that will change us more than we change it. And so I feel like if you try to design it with a particular use case in mind, you're not building for the future. And I think something that's awesome about the work at Lightning Labs and on C Lightning is you're building this open tool that people can bring their own ethos to it and say, what do I want to do with it? It's not prescriptive.
Lisa, what do you think? Do you agree that there's not really a way to misuse the network or to use it as designed?
Let's see, misusing the network. I think that I think we definitely need to be careful when we're developing tools on top of the network. In particular, I'm like thinking of like, I know it's something that we're working on adding to C Lightning, and I believe that LND kind of already offers like a certain feature that basically, and I don't know how familiar like the crowd is with like the exact like technical mechanics of how Lightning payments work, but we're adding this capability to the clients that let you hold on to HTLCs. So basically, when you make a payment, you send an HTLC, and then the other side has this opportunity to like accept it and pull the money through. And so, like C Lightning is like adding this ability to like kind of hold on to a payment that you've gotten if you're a vendor, and then at some point in the future, so like you have a certain amount of time before that payment that's been sent to you expires, and it kind of varies depending on certain parameters that you set when you send a payment, but when you send that payment, until it gets kind of like accepted by the vendor, all of the money along the pathway to the vendor is locked up. So it's like kind of put in escrow until that payment gets freed, and if you hold, so if a bunch of people are doing this and they're sending payments and then the vendors are just kind of holding on to it and not, what do you call it, like actively taking the funds, they lock up the money along the route. And so as a network effect, if a bunch of people start locking up funds, even for like a short amount of time, it's going to make the liquidity of the network like harder to come by because it's being locked up by a bunch of people. So I think like this is just like one example of things that like I think that us as like application developers and spec and protocol like makers need to kind of like keep in mind when we're like adding new things.
Gotcha. I'm really surprised that you guys are working on very different tools and implementations, but seem to have a very common idea of the way that it should work. Is there anything that, in particular, Alex, you admire about Lisa's work or about the way that C Lightning works that's different than LND?
One thing I like about C Lightning is kind of the thinking about the spec. So that's something very powerful in Lightning, is that we're all developing to a common spec. We're creating a standard. And that's part of creating the network effect of the network as a whole, is that there's different applications for different people, different use cases, different, there's another team working on kind of IoT applications of Lightning. So that's one thing that I really like about C Lightning, is that they're thinking so much about the spec and how we can move that forward and adhere to a common standard.
Yeah.
Can I throw some love Lisa's
please.
way and C Lightning's way? Really love the plugin architecture. I like that it's language agnostic. I think that one huge, it's so minor, but we still quabble as developers amongst languages. And I really think that I've seen so many Lightning applications and Lightning tools that have been built across a wide thing, and not being prescriptive about that and letting people come with their own tools to build on Lightning is going to be really big, to just encompass the whole developer community and not, specifically one language or another.
What do you guys think about standards beyond bolts? I'll let each of you, I guess, answer that. Well, do you want to start?
Yeah, I got to pimp out my own spec. So I just talked about WebLN, which is not, it's not a part of the Lightning Network baseline spec. These bolts that LND and C Lightning and Eclair, and any other implementation have to abide by. And I think that having these sorts of ad hoc standards that people agree on a layer on top. I mean, I really think of something like Joule as like layer 3, where Lightning is layer 2. And I think the further away you get from the baseline spec, the faster you can move, and you can, mistakes aren't quite so harsh on you. And so, I mean, we see releases of LND or C Lightning like on a monthly basis, whereas on Bitcoin it's usually like quarterly or really far apart. BIPs take a really long time, and so. I look at that as a way to improve on the actual user experience without having to get us all in a room. You can keep it just to the application developers.
Yeah, that makes sense. Lisa, is there a project in this space that you're either really excited or curious about beyond what you're working on? It's a hard one, I know.
That's a good question. I feel like...
Your Twitch channel, that's a really exciting project.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not as exciting though, because like I'm doing it. So sorry. I'm really excited about the new stuff that people are building on top of like the plugin infrastructure for C Lightning. We've had like some contributions. I mean, it's not like the most exciting and new stuff for the Lightning space in general, but it's new for C Lightning, which is kind of cool. So we've had someone working on an autopilot, which is really fun. Christian Decker, my teammate, has written a couple plugins. Like the rebalancer is really fun. Like it helps you like move kind of payments around. And he also recently added a kind of an invoiceless payment mechanism that takes advantage of like circular loop things that like drop off payments at other people. So I think there's a lot of kind of new and interesting ways to pay people and move funds around that like stuff like the plugin system or LND's like gRPC kind of infrastructure lets people build new stuff. And so yeah, I think I'm excited to see kind of what new stuff people build.
Awesome. Alex, what do you think? What are you either curious about or excited about beyond your own work?
One thing I think is an awesome project is the Wasabi wallet. I think the whole idea of improving privacy of UTXOs is an incredible idea and very important to Bitcoin overall. It's also a question in terms of Lightning privacy. So you're releasing a node to the world that has kind of a consistent identity, and people can see, if it's a public node, people can see UTXOs that are associated with that public key. And if you ever connect your own identity to this public key, then they can kind of see which UTXOs are connected to you. So I think that making the anonymity set of these coin join transactions larger and making it very accessible is something that is super important. I even think it's maybe more important to Bitcoin than Lightning is.
Really? Well, what do you think?
I think for me, kind of going back to your cypherpunk question, I can't think of anything more cypherpunk than everyone having this always-on server at home that you give people permissioned access to. And so something that the L&D team is working on, which I think Olalu has dubbed the bakery, which I love it for the name alone, but I had talked about these macaroons, these fancy cookies. So the bakery is the idea of being able to bake these macaroons that have very specific use cases for them. So to me, that is freedom from like credit card systems or otherwise, where you give out this piece of information. If someone gets your credit card number, they can charge it all day long. And so the idea here would be that you could give permissioned access to various services to be able to just access a subset of your node, and limited by, you could limit it to, you know, a number of Satoshis per day or per month. I mean, we could replace subscription fees. And then if at any point, I know some of y'all out there have probably signed up for a gym membership, and then you tried to cancel that gym membership, and it was like a horrific part of your life. Being able to just cancel it on them and saying, you know, I as like a sovereign actor no longer want you to be able to take money from me. To be able to do that and to force companies to have to respect users in that way is super exciting to me. And I don't think it's limited to this one L&D implementation. I think we're going to see, like with the plugin architecture, you're going to see more people programming their nodes in ways that maybe even the developers didn't initially see. But I think the use case there is so powerful for kind of freeing us from you know, an unfortunate financial system where, you know, you can get hit with a bad credit score or something, even though you did not give anyone access to use your identity.
Gotcha. What do you think is an unanswered question about the Lightning Network that we should keep in mind when we start feeling maybe a little bit too bullish about what it's capable of?
I think I'm going to have to go back to spending Bitcoin. I think that's the end goal for all of us. But I think sometimes we need to check ourselves and understand that getting people to spend what is, you know, these days a store of value is it's a big mind shift. We started in the payment mindset, and then we went to store of value, and so trying to shift people back to payments, it can be kind of tricky. So I think before I get too excited about it, I'm very excited from a technical perspective, but when I think about using it, I think it's important to be sober about who it is most useful for. So I don't know if I'm going to be going to Whole Foods and paying with Lightning anytime soon. But what I am really excited about is being able to use you know, Lightning apps that have been built by somebody in a totally different country where, you know, we didn't have to deal with that exchange. So I think sticking to the strengths of Bitcoin transactions and not assuming that Lightning totally changes the underlying asset that is Bitcoin.
Gotcha. Would you agree with that, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, that's one reason why, well, so like I'm a little bit pessimistic on merchant adoption, just because in a lot of cases it's not so compelling to just, if I wanted to describe to somebody who's not in the space why they should start using a Lightning wallet and making purchases, well, what's the advantage? You know, like unless you're into it, it's not so compelling. So one thing I like is Lightning apps that are only available on Lightning. So if you're talking about micropayments, that's only possible really with a Lightning network. There's hardly anything that can compete. And there's a lot of interesting like games and these kind of concepts that are available. But I do think it's definitely a barrier to like I'm buying my groceries or buying coffee type of adoption. Is like from both sides. From the side that why should I as a merchant accept Lightning for my coffee, even though it's technically possible and it's technically scalable. Like, what's my advantage? One thing I do like is a Bit Refill has announced, is now offering 2% off all purchases that are made using Lightning, and I think that's super powerful to get people, give people some kind of real reason why I should use this. Like, I've been using the Square Cash Card. Yeah. And they give me money. They give me $1 every coffee. So it's just like, make it worth my while.
Gotcha.
I think so to kind of build on that, I think that small vendors, or especially vendors that have trouble getting credit card processors to process payments for them, I think will be some of the drivers in terms of adoption. And I part of me sort of, and again, this is total speculation, but in terms of driving adoption, part of me kind of thinks that vendors will actually drive it to a certain extent, and that credit card fees are expensive. Like if you're a small vendor and you don't have a lot of volume coming through, paying 2 to 3% of every transaction to a PayPal or Square is kind of high. So if there's a way that they can get paid and not have to pay out that money to a payment processor, I think that, well, maybe. It seems like there's a potential possibility that vendors will kind of help drive adoption through consumers by, like you were saying, incentivizing people to use Lightning, maybe through a discount or something.
Yeah, I can definitely say I did a t-shirt sale a month ago or so. And the experience for me setting that up as a kind of a small vendor, I sold 30 of them. I can't go to Square and set up a partnership with them. Maybe I could use their API, but they're going to take 3% off the top or something, which I have to pass that cost on to the customer. So it was really great just to do kind of a one-off. I'm not big time, and so I do think that we're going to kind of stay in that small zone. I also really like that Alex highlighted microtransactions. That was something that I really focused on when I was talking before, because I think that we oftentimes focus a lot on replacing existing structure with new technology, but what is really fun and cool to think about, but it's hard because we haven't thought of it yet, is the new use cases that you get. And so I really think that we're going to see some totally new structures of how we transact on the web because of these instant, cheap payments.
Yeah, so I want to do that. Can you guys all close your eyes for me for just 5 seconds? I swear there's a method to my madness. And I want you to imagine you have a crystal ball, and you can look into the future with this crystal ball. What do you see in terms of how Lightning is being used in ways that maybe it's not being used today, new possibilities that it's created? You can be completely wild if you want. Alex, did you want to start us off?
I missed the time frame. What's the time frame?
Whatever you want. You've got this magic ball.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe not 1,000 years, but you can travel around in it.
Well, so let's say after hyper-Bitcoinization and with the end of fiat, so
all right,
a few years.
I'm with you.
I think that we will see the changes that will happen. I feel like the chain will reach capacity. So for the past year we've seen the chain the mempool has actually been emptying out. I think that in an optimistic scenario, we're going to have fees that are going to be persistent in the mempool, so people are going to be regularly transacting off-chain to just avoid fees. And I also can see wallets solving a lot of the problems that we see now that are just very technical problems. So like when I first started using the internet, I had this thing called Internet in a Box. And like, you know, it's like, oh, you heard about this on CNN, now you can have this in your home. And it involved like setting up all sorts of things to be able to connect to the internet. And you know, now it's like a universal experience, and we have like billions of people on the internet. So in order to get from here to there, I think we will get there. It's just what it will look like is that things that were previously complicated will be solved by a combination of there'll be external services. I don't think that it will, everything will be decentralized perfectly, and that you will, not rely on anybody else. You'll be totally self-sovereign.
You mean this can't create a utopia?
I don't even know if that is a utopia. Like, I feel like there are certain efficiencies that are going to happen, and I think there'll be a lot more user choice because these are systems that are, more pure in terms of you can just go on the internet and select who you want. But I think there'll be certain people with economies of scale. So that's kind of how I see the network evolving. Is that certain people are offering services that really make your life seamless in terms of accessing the network, and that for all regular payments, regular style back and forth, that not only are we using the network, but I also see like Lightning becoming a standard for payment channels. So payment channels is, just by itself is a concept that we always talked about in Bitcoin of how we were going to solve scalability. Even without the HTLCs, without routing, we said there's so many situations in the world where you're just going back and forth between two people. Like, there's only a limited number of exchanges. They're just sending back and forth. So really enshrining that as a protocol, that's what I can kind of see when we get to the end game.
What did you see in your ball, Lisa?
Yeah, so I think like in I don't know if they call it the possible future, is one, we see like a disappearance of credit cards for online payments. When you think about it, like sending a 16-digit number as like your method of authorizing someone to take money out of your account is like pretty, what's the word, not deprecated, but like doesn't really make a lot of sense in a world where information like travels really quickly. So I think we'll see credit card payments kind of go away. Whether it's like Lightning that replaces those or not, it's going to be some form of digital payment network that I think is going to kind of take away from that. And then the other thing that I think I would like to see, like semi-utopic internet future, where ads go away. And the reason that ads would go away is because it's possible to like actually pay people for content or for services in a way that like makes sense, if that makes sense, and is like lightweight enough that it's like a few cents per whatever to look at a thing, such that in the aggregate, that's enough to run a website like a newspaper or a YouTube channel, or like maybe enable like tiny creators to like have like a content generating business that's sustainable online, because everyone who looks at it like pays for it to some extent. And so I think that level of service and that level of kind of like a way of being able to like be on the web and not be tracked, because we no longer need to know who you are, so that we can serve you the best ads for your experience or whatever, like the most likely for you to like click on. I think that would be kind of an awesome future to live in, that I think now the Lightning is one way that we could possibly get there.
Alex, your Y'all's blog is still going, right? Y'all's?
Y'all's?
Yeah.
What have you learned so far as you've been operating that and just helping that grow?
Well, I've kind of been slacking on the development of the y'alls.org code base, but
when open source, I want to contribute.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely showed some of the problems that we have to address. On Y'alls, I offered this service to open channels to people. And it was kind of hidden. It was on the About page. But that actually got huge traction because people want this inbound liquidity. So that's one thing that I kind of learned from Y'alls is like, oh, like we have this kind of liquidity market problem. People want it, and there's suppliers. And then I also, learned that the Lightning is really like hype cycle driven. So there was periods where y'all's had a lot of traffic, and then there's periods when it kind of drops off. So I think that really reinforced to me that Lightning in its current iteration is about experimentation and having fun. And I kind of think about it also like the early internet, where it's like you can go on to surf and, you know, like check out Zombocom. Like there's all sorts of fun things to do, and like we know that there's this potential in the future, and we want to just try out different things. And that's why I made Y'alls in the first place, is also to be an experimental platform to think about things that we could do in the future, to think about things like auto paying and, you know, micropayments, that kind of thing.
Gotcha.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I saw some really cool shit in my crystal ball, and I didn't get a chance.
No, we're coming back to it, I promise. Tell me about your ball.
The year's 2247. Embedded in your spine is a Casa Nano. You've got Joule Vision contact lenses. When you go to a movie theater, the screen is blank. You must confirm a payment with your mind.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all. I had to pay more. It presented me another invoice, the ball, but I couldn't find a route.
I think something that's really interesting is none of you guys in your balls mentioned multi-asset swaps using Lightning Network for different assets other than Bitcoin. Is that because you think it's maybe not feasible or necessary, or is it because you just didn't mention it, and now that you think of it, there's ways that you imagine that?
I guess I'll take that one. I think one thing that's a little difficult is that you're seeing all sorts of different payment channel implementations. I know that Zcash is working on their confusingly named Bolt network, and there are a whole slew of them on Ethereum. Every token is now recognizing the constraints of the network and working on their own payment channel. So I think it sort of requires interest on both sides, right? I think most of the Lightning development is focused on Bitcoin and a little bit of Litecoin on the side. And so it's going to take people trying to make these payment channels, understanding the difficulty of it, and recognizing the value of having an existing network to kind of bootstrap on. And then I think once decentralized exchanges start to see the troubles of being pegged to a particular chain, and they want to get outside of just tokens, and they want to have cross-chain swaps, I think that's when you'll start to see people start to pay attention, because Bitcoin is going to be the front runner on all of that stuff, and Lightning Network is sort of, that's our horse in the race. And so I think that if you want to do cross-chain atomic swaps, you're going to have a Lightning Network implementation on your chain of choice. So I think it will be a few years, maybe a few months, depending on how encouraged someone is to try. But I think we will see it.
How do you think the Bolt Zcash experiments relate to the way that Lightning Network works for Bitcoin? Would it also apply? You had mentioned privacy earlier.
I can't pretend to be an expert on it. I will say that they're much more focused on the privacy concerns. So Lightning does do a lot for privacy in terms of your transactions aren't known to the network. You onion route payments. So in general, fewer people know about it, but there still are, as Alex mentioned, like your UTXOs on chain can be tracked. So I think they're very focused on the privacy angle, which is a consideration with Lightning Network, but I think that's kind of Zcash's mantra, right, is privacy. So that's where they're honing in on, and maybe why they felt that Lightning Network wasn't doing enough.
Alex, are there any developments coming up that would improve privacy for Bitcoin usage on the Lightning Network?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I talked about in my talk is that in Lightning Loop, we want to improve the privacy of doing submarine swaps. And it actually just falls out of cost. So a lot of times, if you make your transactions more cost efficient, that involves removing more identifying information from the transactions, which means that the transactions are more private. I also think that in the future iterations of the protocol spec, we can do a lot more. So currently, like a Lightning channel, you can mark it as private. Like in LND, you say private channel, public channel. But in actuality, you're messaging around everybody who you send an invoice to what the UTXO of your channel is. So it's not that private because you just told everybody what your UTXO is. That's something that we can fix with some ideas that have been talked about in the protocol stage with hidden destinations. There's possibilities where we can say, instead of just having one identity on the network, you actually have multiple identities. You give somebody some identity. I mean, kind of the first step, I think, is just making the baseline design so that we know that in the future we can incrementally add all these improvements.
Are there similar features being explored for C Lightning as well? Or are there different privacy features that we're
Privacy concerns. I think that on a whole, like most of the privacy stuff kind of happens at the spec level. So like C Lightning definitely, conforms to the specs level of privacy things in terms of like being able to have like private channels or private nodes that aren't advertised. Personally, like in terms of privacy, my biggest concern around privacy in Lightning currently is less that has anything to do with Lightning and more to do with getting things shipped to me that I buy over Lightning, if that makes sense. Because I'm using this like anonymous payment network that's got this amazing kind of like onion style packets. So you can like route a payment, no one knows where it came from. It's just like, oh, as a vendor, I've like received this anonymous payment from this anonymous person from somewhere on the internet, and I would like you to send it to this address, like to this person, like please, like here's exactly where I want you to send this payment. I have no idea how or who sent you that money, but you should definitely send that thing to me. So I think that I think in terms of privacy, it's kind of like Lightning's got a lot of really great privacy stuff, but then there's like kind of this whole bigger network that you of how do you actually get the goods in, like logistically. In terms of privacy, I worry more about that than anything in terms of privacy on Lightning.
I'd asked Alex about y'all's, and Will had talked about his store. Have you ever used Lightning yourself beyond development?
I'm sorry?
Beyond development. Have you ever used Lightning for something for fun, like your Twitch show, right?
Oh yes, I'm on Twitch.
So what have you learned from that experience?
I'm sorry.
Have you built an application that actually uses Ellen Charge or something to generate invoices?
No, I bought things out on the internet. I bought a thing from, I think one of my first Lightning purchases was I'm a shopper. I bought this really sweet LED lightning lamp from somewhere in China that it's sending this payment to a place, I don't know if any of you have ever tried to send money to China, and it's bought things off vendors on Alibaba and figuring out how to go through the, what is it called, Western Union dance to actually get money to a person in China was kind of complicated. I did this for a side project thing one time, and the Lightning thing was super easy. I just sent it to them, and it was okay, great. Now hopefully this thing will arrive at my house, and it did.
Gotcha. I had also given them both an opportunity to talk about what they learned. Well, was there anything that you've learned so far as you've been developing over the past year that really struck you or surprised you?
That is a great question. Yeah, I've built a few things on top of Lightning. I think one thing that I've learned is that a little bit of sysadmin knowledge goes a long way. So if you're a developer, you should know what's kind of running under the hood a little bit. Lightning a little bit forces that on you. You have to know a little bit more about maintaining uptime and having backups and opening ports and a lot of that. So I do think that some of this early experience does require you to learn more even beyond Lightning. But I'll be honest, I kind of got started in decentralized development with Ethereum, and I think one thing that I learned there that I'm starting to see on Lightning is that developer tools and knowledge is so key to building a network of developers. And so I was really excited to hear Elizabeth say that they're having a conference in October, because right now I think that Lightning development largely has happened in small pockets across the world. And so I think something that's really important to me is that all of the work that I do with Lightning is open source. And I try to write as much about it and explain to people how it works and encourage people to try it themselves. So I think that putting the tools out there, people want them, people will use them, and that's the most important thing you can do when making a Lightning application is teach people what you learn from it.
Gotcha. You guys had all mentioned experimentation being needed and time being needed. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you think we need in order to further develop and boost the network?
Oh man, probably something uniquely available to Lightning users. So I think that Alex touched on that pretty good. When you put a little scarcity out in there, everybody's oh, how do I set up a node? How do I get this thing? So whether it's a stupid T-shirt sale or hats, or maybe we can find something that's truly unique to the Lightning experience that having it and getting it now is really valuable. I mean, one thing that honestly motivates me is like the 1ML stats. Seeing that you're like a Lightning node that was like, number some hundred, like being that low digit count, like that's just encouraging to me is being an early adopter. So I think if we can show people this kind of jokey but a little bit serious value of like, hey, you should get on the network today because it's growing and you want to be a part of this. I think that is something that we really need to foster.
Gotcha. Alex, what do you think that we're doing really well when it comes to developing the Lightning Network that we can just continue doing more of?
I think that people are really keeping the ethos like alive. Like a lot of people who are involved in this, one way that things could go is people could be like making a lot of promises about what things can do that are false promises. And I think we saw a lot of that with blockchain stuff, is that like, oh, this blockchain can do anything. And I think Lightning is kind of keeping it real to a greater degree. And because we have the advantage that we're not selling a token really. I mean, we're selling Bitcoin, but this is also a multi-coin network. This is a protocol for blockchains to talk to each other. So I think that people keeping it real, being very like couched in their promises about how things work. I think hopefully we can do more of that.
Awesome. Lisa, was there any other thought that you wanted to add to close us out? Anything we haven't touched on that you think is important for us to know about Lightning?
I think like as like a C Lightning developer who I work on like the spec or like the protocol stuff, but I just think that it's also really important like how we have these like third-party, calling them third-party devs, but basically like developers who are building tools that let us use Lightning. Like none of the stuff that I'm working on is making it such that I can like necessarily go out and like buy things with Lightning today, if that makes sense. Like I have to like, I want like a wallet that I can like push a button and like payments, or like need like the Chrome extension kind of plugins to make stuff happen. And so I think that the ability to like the Lightning Network to pull people in and get them excited about it and get them thinking about things that they can build using Lightning is really important. And I'm really excited that we've already had like a lot of people already like putting work into that, and I'm excited to see what kind of new stuff comes out in the next few years.
Awesome. So we had the conference coming up. Is there anything else in terms of releases or just in general something that you're looking forward to in the next few months or year, I guess?
Next few months. There's the dual funding stuff that I'm working on, which hopefully will get done at some point. It would be great. Other stuff I'm excited about. I guess I focus on like spec stuff. So like I think multi-part payments is going to be really fun and exciting and great for liquidity movements, which is like the ability to make payments that's done through stuff. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, last call. Any last thoughts you want to leave the audience with today?
If I can shill my wares a little bit here, I am really focused on developers, so I'm going to be writing a multi-part guide that takes you from knowing nothing about Lightning to setting up your first Lightning application. And I'm really hoping that we can just attract more developers by putting more out there. So Alex, open source y'alls, man, do it. I want it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
No.
Thank you so much, you guys, for joining us today. You're good. Thank you.